Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I see a lot of people coming from the last stream, so thank you everyone for joining us for this new stream. We are on the Building Context-Aware AI Agents with Auth0 stream, and I'm sure most of you saw in Discord, but we have a very special guest joining us today, so let's definitely make sure to give them a great round of applause in chat when I introduce them. But before we get started, this is the AI Agents with Auth0 stream, and I'm Varshni from MLH. I'm a coach here at Major League Hacking, and I'm basically going to be acting as your moderator for the stream. Our guest streamer is going to be running the entire stream, and I'm just going to be helping and pinning things in chat. So if y'all have any questions, definitely make sure you put them in chat, and I will pin them up and make sure that they get answered by our special guest. So speaking of our lovely special guest, let's introduce him right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fred Patton, Senior Developer Advocate at Auth0, and we'll talk about one of my favorite topics, AI agents. We'll look at the context-aware spin, and please feel free to ask questions at any time, and I'll try to kind of mix them in, and let's go.
Sounds great. Definitely make sure y'all check in for this event. We want you to get the swag points for attending these events, so definitely make sure you check in at that ticker at the bottom of the screen. If y'all aren't able to copy paste from that sticker, no worries. That is exactly what the chat is for. So I'll pin that for a little bit, but we will get started with our stream. Just make sure that you check in. I'll take that link down in a little bit. Throughout the stream, we'll be going to a couple of different websites and going through a couple of different pieces of documentation. So if there are any important links, we will be pasting them in chat, so no worries about that. But we are good to go. Fred, are you good if I add your screen to the stream?
All set.
Okay, perfect. Have a great stream.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for seeing me. Yeah, so maybe you're familiar with Auth0. It's the customer identity platform, and all these things about login and authentication. And as with everyone else in this agentic age where AI agents are basically pulling all the attention, Auth0, we have Auth0 for AI agents in our developer preview. And so you might ask yourself, why, right? So if we think about it, agents use LLMs, and those are trained on all this kind of fixed knowledge, and so they can come and generate amazing things, answer all these amazing targeted questions, but they didn't have the questions from your organization. They didn't have any real-time information. And so we had all this explosion of RAG where we brought in context just in time to feed those to the LLM so it could still use its base knowledge and answer all the specialized questions. Now, there have been cases where companies have had their data exposed, and there are issues about that. And so different techniques like fine-grained authorization were used to kind of protect against that, and we'll look at that. But the especial reason now for something like Auth0 for AI agents and this greater focus on context aware is that it's not just now organizations and companies that need to inject their context into LLMs. It's for users, right? We have things like Slack, Stripe, Twitch, all these different products that we have, and we want to be able to have the agent work on these too, right? And so that leads a lot of issues. I don't want other people accessing my data, and I don't want the agent doing things that I don't want with my data. So we need a lot more means to control. And so as RAG is opening up to using personal data, um, we'll need these kind of techniques we'll talk about. So Auth0 for AI agents is based on like 4 main pillars. The user authentication that you would expect so that we can know who's who and what they have access to. Then the means to be able to connect to all of your different information, but without just say giving the agent your creds and allowing someone to kind of trick it into exposing it or anything like that. So basically, you want agents to be able to do things for you, but you want to be very intentional about it. It's kind of like if you let someone into your house, um, that doesn't mean you want them to wander around your house without you present and doing whatever they want. So it's basically the same kind of thing. So we want to be able to authorize and scope what an agent is able to do. So yeah, the page I'm talking about right now is the regular auth0.com/AI, and then you can just click docs. It will take you to intro overview. We've overhauled a lot of the docs, so it's going to be pretty easy to move around, and hence I'm not even using slides for this. So we talked about that aspect of being able to basically call third-party APIs. You can also do it for your own APIs and with similar type of things. So your users coming in, maybe they don't all have it. Maybe there's different tiers of customers, or maybe you have their docs, their private docs up there, and you only want to expose it to the right people. So the same things apply, whether it's the first-party users or third-party users. And we touched on RAG a little bit. So with fine-grained authorization is instead of just doing these very coarse permissions of roles, we're able to really target using relationships about in what context someone should be able to see what, or how much of the resources in a much more granular way that you would do with RBAC. And so when you have your agent being conned into giving information, it might still try, but with proper permissions and authorization hygiene in place, it shouldn't be able to accomplish that. And that's what we want. And the other thing I haven't touched on is asynchronous authorization. So we're talking about if you want your agent to do something for you, you still want to be kept in the loop, human in the loop, and you want to have control about what it can do. And you probably, if you're giving it access to your Stripe account, you're probably giving it access to kind of just do a certain task that you want, and then it shouldn't keep that. Once it's done the task, hopefully those permissions will go away until they're needed again, and that will take away threat vectors. So async auth is pretty important. So as an agent is working in the background, maybe it was doing some search and it found a product you were looking for, or maybe it had to do a bunch of work before it was ready to pull the trigger, and maybe you're not there, maybe you stepped out to lunch. This allows you to basically send a push notification to the corresponding user's device, showing all the context, and then it can kind of hit authorize, and only until then will the agent be able to proceed. So let's get started and take a look at authorization. So you will be probably mostly new to Auth0, and so I will just quickly jump to the dashboard so we can have a little bit of a look at that. So in Auth0, basically you have your number of applications and kind of bundled into something that we call a tenant. So you'll basically freely be able to create different applications for, maybe it's a native kind of mobile app, maybe it's a single page web application, maybe it's a regular web application, or maybe it's machine to machine type uses where you got some service or daemons running, and you say, okay, why is this important right now? It's because based on these different application architectures, The security resources available vary. If you've got like a regular web application or the machine-to-machine cases, you're able to really reliably handle secrets, things like client secrets and those type of things, without exposing them. But if we're talking about single-page applications and even mobile applications, you have basically front-end applications, and you can't really reliably generally store those secrets safely. And so that's why we want to know that up front to basically control what kind of options and things you might want to do. So we'll tour a little more of the dashboard. Um, Generally, dashboards can sometimes get super confusing or complicated, like AWS. No offense there, it's a great tool. I use it all the time. But so there's some necessary extra baggage, but hopefully not too much. So in Auth0, you can have you're authenticating users. So you can, if you want to, you can store them in a database. You can store them in your own and give a connection, or you can store it using Auth0. You can have all kinds of social logins. So here's Google Auth. You can create other various types of social connections, Facebook, Line, all sorts of things. So you'll have all kinds of ways to control which ways users can come into your application, and how those applications are linked, or if they're linked, and that type of thing. Enterprise, we probably won't care so much, but if you've got Active Directory or certain identity providers, you can go through those as well. You can let people do passwordless login. You can let them use biometric, and you can basically control your flow about when you ask which things you want to do identifier first, and identifier plus biometrics, things like that. So I think I touched on maybe this enough. I'll just jump to applications a little bit more. We'll jump into a basic web app view, where we'll see some kind of things we'll probably expect. We'll see like a domain for the actual application, client ID, secret, any kind of customizations you want to do visual. We won't talk about those all, but you can have your themes. You can show your logo. More control of how the authentication looks. You also can basically choose to manage that yourself and just call back into the APIs as well. So you can have the auth hosted to you by Auth0, and you can use your custom domain. You can use the Auth0 domain and your tenant ID, or however you want to do that. It's all pretty flexible. But at the end of the day, once these authorization events happen, you want to give it ways to call back into your app. So you can give it callback URLs, and including localhost type things. What happens when you log out? Any things like that. Any kind of CORS related things. All sorts of features. I think the other thing we can quickly look at grant types, because if you're going to do something with Auth0 and want to see certain things work, you might, like if you want to do push notifications or passwordless OTP, you'll just basically make sure you enable those. So lastly, you can basically add permissions and scopes to APIs. So you can kind of do CRUD type things where you can say, okay, these granular permissions allow you to create or delete or read users and these type of things to really control what an MCP server or a LLM using tools can basically do on your behalf. So let's jump back now that we've had that long segue. Okay, so yeah, so I gave basically a look at the dashboard because that affects the authentication a good bit, and really a lot of the features are driven by the dashboard. We can look at now calling APIs on a user's behalf and jump and look at some kind of code examples. We'll get to code in a moment. So in authorization, you can have like an authorization server that will basically make sure we know who you are. And then your APIs and application are basically the resource server. So once someone has an access token, they'll now just come to you with requests and you'll verify that information and then give them access to the resources. So pretty basic there. So let's take a look at an example so it makes more sense. Let's jump back actually here. Okay. There we are. And we'll just show Python. So yeah, so let's say we've got users and we want them to be able to access APIs and do things and use the tools. So a regular web application is a kind of a typical way to do that. In the dashboard, you'd go to the applications thing, you'd create an application. You saw you could select a few different things, single page web application, regular application. So here in this case, we're looking at doing something with regular applications where we kind of set the callback URLs we're developing. So localhost should work for us and kind of do those things and get running. So how it looks is that in this case, am I missing questions? Okay. In this case, we can basically use LangGraph. So if you're familiar with LangGraph, it's built on top of LangChain, and then LangChain is basically an agent framework to create your AI agent. So LangChain is pretty. It's when you have basically the kind of sequential use cases, pretty basic flows where you want to kind of do this, then this, then this type thing. But if you need more control, kind of more complicated interactions, then you can use LangGraph, which is based on top of LangChain. And of course, it has kind of like a graph structure, and you can kind of really control how your agent works and works through a different problem, how it breaks down tasks. So if we wanted to use if we wanted to call APIs on a user's behalf, then we basically could include something like LangGraph, LangChain OpenAI, and then the LangGraph CLI. And there's basically just really a few basic touch points in your application that you can basically use this functionality. So it's not like a heavy lift to your application. It's basically putting it in the key points that you need. So one is basically passing the credentials to the agent, so that the agent can be verified, and that the agent can be basically governed in terms of how it takes actions, what it has permissions to do, and so forth. So we'll see here in this Python snippet here is that we're defining a route, and then in this route we're specifying that it's requiring a session. This probably looks normal enough to us, and the difference here is that you'll be able to basically access the token sets where that would be different tools that the user has given permission to use. It could be your Google Calendar, it could be your Google Docs, it could be your Stripe account, it could be your Facebook, whatever type of thing, and whatever those actual scopes of doing it, those would basically get loaded in here. And so let's see a more tangible example of how we would define a tool to call your API. So here, we're basically taking in the Auth0 access token and using that to basically gate access. So here we have your get user info function as an example, and it's going to see if the user is logged in. And then if all is well and it can take action, then we'll basically pass this bearer token in the request. And then the endpoint here is user info that we want them to be able to access. And so that's just basic auth. So again, maybe you have users with access to their own documents. Maybe you have free users and they don't have access to everything, however you want to do it. So in defining a tool like that, you're basically just passing the function. So here are tools, that function we define, your simple Python function, you would just pass it in an array amongst the tools that you're going to allow your agent to be able to access. And then here we're using the LangChain OpenAI. So we'll basically get an instance for our LLM and we'll create a React agent. So not React like the framework, but React like the prompting model. And so we're basically using the reactive prompting model, and we're now applying our tools. And then, of course, we'll get the user's prompt, and now the agent will be able to basically use your connections, use the user's apps in a principled way that is based on what permissions they gave. Naturally, as usual, we'll use our OpenAI API key or whatever LLM we're trying to use, all the same. And so you'll see that that's about the level of code you'd have to do to basically allow someone to call APIs on the user's, I'll call your APIs on your user's behalf. We can also do it similarly with third-party things again, like with other integrations like Google, Facebook, and so forth. In this case, we can stay in the LangGraph frame of mind, and a lot of that initial setup of the application is going to be the same. So we don't need to repeat ourselves there. Most of these things, like, okay, Auth0 configuration that I showed in the dashboard, your base URL, the stuff it generates for you. The only thing you'll generate your own 32-byte value for the random secret, which is just it's shown elsewhere. We'll look at it later. But anyway, you'll just basically have some random bytes there for that. Your Auth0 domain, client ID, client secret, your API key, and then you can also use the LangGraph observability stuff by just passing in that URL, and it integrates for free. Yeah, so here's the generating your random 32-bit value that I was referring to for your Auth0 secret. So all of these samples are going to be under are all going to be under github.com auth0-samples / auth0 assistant 0. So moving along, then yeah, we'll basically install our front end stuff, install the backend stuff that we need. So Auth0 has a fast API integration amongst many other integrations. And so we could run that. We'd run the LangGraph, and that's most of it. It's going to look more or less what we showed before. Let me just jump and show you a little more details here. So we're going to basically do a wrapper around the Auth0 AI SDK. So we're pulling in some imports for authorizers, so Auth0 client params, the Auth0 interface itself, something for configs. And so we'll basically use our dashboard values to fill the Auth0 object up. And then in this case, we're going to use Google Calendar, where we want to be able to basically use the events interface. So it's as simple as doing a call to Auth0 AI and saying with token vault. Token vault is basically how we handle these tokens. And so instead of giving the AI tool your permissions and trusting that it doesn't do something you don't want with it, what happens is that it goes into this token vault, and then the agents are basically passed scoped down, short-lived permissions so that they can basically get their job done and not hold on to those permissions indefinitely. So that's what's going on behind the scenes here. So we are basically giving the agents tool access to our calendar to check to see our events. So similarly as before, we have some endpoint that we want people to be able, authenticated users to be able to hit. And then normally if you've had some experience doing the authentication with OAuth, you've got these, the tokens expire. And so you've got to go and manage the refresh and do those different type of things. In this case, it's all handled for you behind the scenes. So you'll just pass in your refresh token, and then you don't have to worry about that type of management. It gets taken care of for you, which is a good thing. So time, okay. So here we're using the access token to call APIs from the tool. So if we want to list upcoming events, for example, then we're getting the Google Access token from the vault, and we are basically building up the data for the params for basically specifying calendar access. So we are retrieving now through that calendar service whatever events that it found, and scoping kind of how many results we want and whatever our search parameters are, and then we basically get the results, format them how we want, and now we're basically able to successfully pull users' data from other tools through our AI agent, again in a safe and managed way. And in terms of, like before in the previous example, we basically just pass these functions that we have in an array for tools, and then we again create a React agent using the React prompting framework, where we basically link the LLM to the tools that it can use. And so that's as simple as that. I mentioned earlier that if you want to give agents access to things, it's in order to do something. And so you don't want to just give an agent access to whatever type things it is and hope that they only use it for what you want. You basically want to have those connections set up so that when you ask an agent to do something, then based on what you've asked it, it's got to go ask for those permissions so that it can have the authority to go do it. You'll basically get some notification on your phone, see all the context back from the agent of why it's asking for these privileges. Since you just asked it to do it, you probably won't be too surprised, but at least you have the context to see exactly what you're doing. And then once you hit the approval, it can proceed and take action here. So this is kind of called step-up authorization. The agent might already have, say, read access to do certain things, but if it's a more sensitive thing, like actually triggering a transaction or modifying your data or sending emails in your name, then you might want it to come back and ask for additional permissions. And so this is kind of what we call step-up authorization. And that's kind of related to what we're doing in terms of giving more fine-grained control. And so now you've already got the agent, he's got the tool, and it's ready to basically take action. But now this action is a little more sensitive, and so it's actually got to go and get the more powerful credentials before it can proceed. And so that kind of protects your users so that only with your authorization can they do the more sensitive actions. So here I mentioned the token vault. So there's kind of an interrupt for those type of things where it's got to do just-in-time permissions gathering, and then here we're doing it where we basically set the interrupt, and now when we have the action, we're basically going to be able to display from the from Auth0 basically a consent page that says what the effects, what are the actions and what are the effects of these actions are going to be, and then it won't actually release the permissions to the agent until the user has approved. So that's just what we're seeing there. And this is just however you want to put it into your UI. So we can, I think I should jam faster on time and get to async authorization. So let's do that. So this is the human in the loop thing I was talking about. Now that we're able to take action on users' data, of course they want to be kept in the loop and have control so that, you know, the agents can't do whatever they want. And there's something called client-initiated backchannel, which is part of OAuth 2 that allows you to basically send a push notification to a user, like on a different device. Like, okay, here they're on a PC, or maybe they're even on some really dumb constrained device that can't actually do those type of operations. You could send the push notification on a sufficient device like a cell phone, and again, they can see all the context, give the okay, and then go ahead and be able to proceed. So this is async authorization. So maybe your agent has been running in the background and now it's ready to take action. It's got to get that authorization based on your policies before it can actually do that. So transactional approvals, accessing sensitive data, and executing high privileged tasks are kind of some high level ways to do that. Let's get to some code. Well, again, we'll stick with LangGraph and Fast API. So all of this is going to stay the same. In our dashboard under grant types, we would enable client-initiated back-channel authentication. So I will mention something that I didn't mention previously. I'll just go back and do that. So when I showed you the dashboard previously, I was using a basic tenant. For the for our developer preview, which has these AI features, is actually a different tenant that you need to use. They're kind of prefixed with Gen AI. So let me jump into there real quick and let me open an example application. Okay, here's a regular web app. So now when we go way to the bottom and we talk about advanced settings and we look at grant types, we'll see we have token vault that we were mentioning and client initiated backchannel. So as you know, the first four ones that you see are basically always checked in general, depending on what you're choosing. But then to be able to do asynchronous authorization and to use token vault, we'd have to go to our dashboard for the particular application that we're working with and enable those. So that's what I've done here. I just wanted to quickly show that because I realized that makes a difference and I didn't explain it. Okay, so maybe we don't get too much into the details, but you're aware of basically authenticator apps. So one type of authenticator app from Auth0 is basically Guardian, and so it's just like any other authenticator where you put in a number and then you get the codes and you send them back for the OTPs. So you were able to configure that in in our dashboards. Let's see, yeah, actually, I have to go quicker, so it's in there. You can ask me later about that. Yes. Okay, good. So, yeah, so you can enroll basically an authenticator app. And so now when your users are logging in for that second factor, it'll basically just send a notification to their push device, and that's all good. So that's an option as well for the async notifications, and then they'll just work that way. I mentioned fine-grained authorization, and these are like RAG type use cases, but you can also like you can also use them more generally for really if you've got special policies. Like let's say you've got an agent that's doing things, and you want to kind of constrain and govern how they're doing. So there might be a lot of operations that you do in special cases, like maybe if a certain type of event or maybe some downtime or some kind of incident has happened, only then should certain type of APIs be hit. You can basically use FGA to gate those type of things as well by incorporating that um, into basically your taxonomy of events. So with roles, we basically just picked a different type of roles, and then those are basically high level user permissions where anyone with that role could basically go do certain things. With fine-grained authorization, um, here we're free to basically to define as granular as we want all these type of things. It could be don't let users log in outside of working hours. It could be don't let them log in from unknown or suspicious or blacklisted IP addresses. It could be time of day, whatever different kind of constraints you can use. You're able to basically articulate that in your model and use that as gating permissions for when someone can do something. And so for RAG, typically with documents, it's like, okay, users should be able to read their own documents. If they haven't shared them, other people shouldn't be able to read them. Maybe you have managers or other type roles, and then they can see more stuff normally as admin, like maybe for their team, that type of thing. So fine-grained authorization helps a lot in that way, and you can get as detailed as you would like. So Auth0 has our own fine-grained authorization implementation, but there's also Open FGA, and all of this is based off of Google's Zanzibar paper, and Auth0 years ago committed it into open source, and so you're free to use the open source as well. It's actually a pretty popular project, and a lot of people use it without independently of Auth0. So let's look at a visual. Here you have a user, and he's asking a question. Show me this forecast data, and so you're going to query for information on that data. But then the difference is we're going to check to see if this user is actually entitled to see all the documents in there. And so basically, once that smaller chunk of return values are kind of brought in, we want to be able to basically filter out any ones that shouldn't be accessed. And that's how we stop those horrific cases, like where an agent exposes data that it shouldn't. Even if it tries to, it won't actually have the permissions to be able to kind of receive the results. So you basically prevent your agent from doing things outside of your policy or outside of intents, protecting your company data, protecting the user's data, etc. So in this case, yeah, we see document chunks are returned, the retriever basically makes sure that the user should have access to all those things, and for those things that has access to are then passed to the LLM. And so any kind of bad action is gated. So how it works is that you define your authorization model based on your use cases. It could be teachers, students, whatever type thing, and then kind of relationships like, okay, yeah, this is the owner, this is my doc. Oh, I've been given permission to edit this doc, or I've been given permissions to view this doc. Whatever those types of things are, you basically store the permissions as tuples into the graph, so that, and then these are associated with APIs, so that when that API is being called, you're first checking to see if the authorization constraints have been satisfied or not. Yeah, so maybe it makes sense to show in a demo app. I've been showing examples that are from our demo app called Assistant Zero. And so here, let's take a look at this app. So I didn't do the UI. If I did the UI, it would actually look worse, but it's just pretty bare bones. Let me log in, and we'll start seeing some of the things we talked about in action. So I'm going to try to log in with my Google account here. Okay. Oh, yes, I forgot about this. All right. I actually have to do this on my other machine. Let me just see if I can do this or not. I don't think I can do this. Sorry, I forgot about this. Log in. Okay. I apologize. I was going to show this demo, but I have to use it on a different machine because this is my super lockdown machine. So let's just forget I mentioned it. And let's see. So we have some questions here, I think. Yeah. Would roughly the meaning be, okay, this is a question about human in the loop. And so basically, for human in the loop, is this for critical transactions, sensitive information? Yes, absolutely. And if we think about it, there's other use cases as well. So definitely you want a human to be able to be in the loop for critical transactions and sensitive information, but it could be other things like you've got these agents running and they don't have enough context. Like if you think about when you do something like Perplexity or some of the research assistants, you ask a question and then they go ahead and before they get going, they ask one or two more questions just so that they can give you a better answer. Well, sometimes those questions don't arise for an agent until they're kind of in the middle of things. And so the agent might, though it's not being forced for permissions, it might want to basically say, hey, can you answer me this? And so with async authorization, you can actually ping a human and saying, oh, by the way, I saw these two types of rare sports cards, and you gave me this budget. So which card do you want me to pursue? Right? It could be something like that. Or, hey, you didn't tell me what to do in this type of use case. Now I need more context. And so these are opportunities where the agent can also, for its own uses, call back to the human to get the additional context. So perfect. So I think that's the only other question we have right now. What else can we say? So I didn't show you the demo. I'm sure people have heard about MCP and of course all this tool calling with agents. And so, with power comes responsibility. So if we want to give agents access to our data, we want to be able to really control how it can be done. And for MCP servers, which is a similar case, we want them to be, when they have our creds, well, we don't want to give them our creds. We want to basically give them scope tokens that are very specific about what that particular tool can do with our data. And then similarly, if it needs to do more than that, that requires additional permissions, then in the same way, it can do things like async auth to basically ask for it, and that would basically come back to the AI agent calling the MCP tool, and then, or directly to the user, where they basically have to respond to that before the tool can continue. So we have similar auth for MCP that's coming out, and we have our MCP server that is also coming out soon, and this will be coming out of developer preview probably next month. So yeah, I guess I'll basically open it up for any questions right now, and hopefully this was informative. And while I'm doing that, let me also go here and show you our Assistant 0 that I was kind of talking about. If you're doing Python and you want to use LangChain, if you're doing Python and you want to use Llama Index, or TypeScript and you want to use LangChain, Llama Index, Vercel AI, here you can see complete examples that you can run and see everything in context. So I definitely encourage you guys, if you want to try some of this stuff out, to go to the the Auth0 Assistant 0 repo, which is under Auth0 samples. So, Varsini, there's no other questions?
There is nothing so far. We got that one question and I pinned it, but I will keep pinning them as they come. So don't worry about it at all.
Okay, so I've got about 8 minutes. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So I guess I can talk about one of my favorite topics, which are ambient agents briefly, and all this kind of stuff relates to it. It's kind of one of the motivating factors. So we've been talking about co-pilots that that users basically, they go and they ask a question, then the agent goes and it works on it, right? We already have basically, most of the architectures are already event driven, right? You're reading from Kafka, you've got all these sources, and things are happening. And so the idea is, can we make our agents proactive by reading that event stream? I won't say directly, because that would be very expensive. There's some things that we'd want to look at first, but basically we want to be able to have the AI agent proactively look at the event stream and take action before anyone else notices. And this can also be do things like do things for specific users where the user is asking certain types of questions, and so all these things are ready to go when they ask, or they can also be asynchronously informed if they want to find out about it. So ambient agents are a way to do that, but with that comes a lot of even more responsibilities. First, I mentioned the event stream. There's so many events, especially if you look at something like IoT, where you would not want to be invoking LLMs for every event coming in. And so at this point, it's really a stream processing problem where we build state in context of kind of what's going on. And then when it hits a certain threshold, we have context kind of pulled from the stream of events. And so we can basically pass the summary to the agent and then the triggering action, and allow the agent to Maybe it was a span of 50 or 60 events, and it identifies something that it can take action to. Then it can go ahead and do that. And now, as we talked about, our creds, right? It wants to take action. It might need to ask approval for someone responsible for that action, as well as even someone's for the data. Like maybe I'm the user and I've wanted to do some Stripe transaction or other type of thing like that. And without me having to ask, they found something that's a good option for me or could be a good option for me. So I can get notified it asynchronously without ever having to ask for it. And if I like it, I can say, boom, go for it. And it can go ahead and do this thing for me. And so it's exciting. And I will be seeing a lot more of these patterns in the next year of context-aware agents, where ambient agents are kind of one of the more prevalent ones. Harrison Chase of LangChain has been experimenting with them and popularizing them for a few years. And so back in January, it made more of a splash, and people have actually started looking into the chances to do something with them. And I think that's it.
If anyone else has any more questions, please make sure you put it in chat. We've got some really fun time. Ooh, looks like a question actually just came in.
Yes. Okay, this is a good question. So the question is, what's the best way to integrate Auth0 into an existing authentication flow? For example, if a Rails app already uses devices for users or device for users, but wants to add Auth0 for external agents or APIs. Certainly. So it's not an all or nothing thing. You can use FGA all by itself, and you can use if you're using Auth0 for agents, as was discussed, you can authenticate on behalf of the user and invoke those calls, or you can. And so, for example, you don't want to have your user authenticate multiple times unnecessarily. And so you'll basically pass the token into Auth0, into the agents that are working with Auth0. You'll configure those agents to, like I showed, where you're creating the tools and then you're passing those tools to the LLM. So in this case, when you set up those tools, you'll pass in the user's creds, and by having those creds, it will be able to um, get authorization if it hasn't had them. And so, for any user the first time, it might pop up a window, hey, are you okay with us doing this, and this? The user would say okay, and then that state is in there and doesn't affect any of the other authorization that you're doing. Also, I mentioned identity providers. You can use all kinds of other identity providers. It doesn't really matter. So you can kind of pick and choose to a good degree if and when you want to use Auth0 for governing agent behavior. So that's a great question.
Okay, it looks like that was about our last question. So thank you so much, Fred, for running an absolutely amazing stream. Hope says thank you for answering their question. That was a really great, very interesting stream. It was very interesting to learn about Auth0 agents and getting to go through the documentation with you. I think you explained it really well. I honestly didn't know too much about Auth0 before and its specific agents, but seeing you go through the documentation was very helpful. So thank you so much. Definitely make sure y'all say thank you to him. I see a lot of you on the stream, so definitely make sure you say thank you. Getting a rush of thank yous in here. In the meantime, while we are waiting on those thank yous and those compliments for the stream, definitely make sure y'all fill out the GHW feedback link. It is the best way for us to get feedback on these streams and improve GHW for you in the future. And if you're interested in going to another event right after this, in fact, in 1 minute, we've got the Intro to Agent mode in GitHub Copilot stream coming up. So definitely make sure y'all just stay on the stream and maybe take a quick break and then come back. But we've got another stream right up after this. And Fred, the thank yous just keep coming. It looks like everyone enjoyed your stream. Lots. I think that we are almost, I think we're almost good to go. Any last words?
Yeah, so definitely if you're interested, check out auth0.com/AI. And thanks for listening and tuning in. And thanks for listening.
Of course. Thank you so much, Fred, for your time. And thank y'all for tuning in. Definitely make sure to tune in for the next stream. Thank y'all. Bye.
Bye-bye.